And oftentimes we put all of this focus on the entrepreneur who's selling, the business owner. How important is it then to also look at who's buying this company and how's that going to work, culturally with this company they're taking on, especially if it's one of them scenarios where maybe it has been a bit of a lifestyle. Now he's pulled back, he's got ready for a sale. How important is the buyer in that scenario?
Yeah, the buyer's really important in that scenario because the buyer is going to, I mean, it's like your annual physical with your doctor, right? You're going to give blood work. You're going to go in for a physical exam. He's going to take your blood pressure. He's going to take your weight. And that's essentially what a buyer is doing to the seller. They're going through due diligence. They're gathering all sorts of information, and the buyer is going to know the business, or the buyer is going to have a perception of the business that is probably different from the seller, right? They're gonna see risks in different spots than the seller. But it's critical for the buyer to understand where they want to take the business. And sometimes they're not transparent with the seller about what they want to do with the business, right? As an example, roofing companies in the United States and like plumbing companies and those types of businesses have been very attractive to private equity over the last couple of years because um, they can roll them up into a roll up situation where they roll up all the roofing companies in the Midwest that have that receive more than 50% of their revenue from insurance claims. And like, so it's basically like sort of like storm chasing. So if the buyer has that in mind, then he or she may not really care the nature of the business if it's a lifestyle business, because they're going to consolidate the financials at a central office. They're going to consolidate sales at a central office, and all they really need are labor and office people to run the offices in the place they go. So it's really critical to understand and to communicate from the sell side as well as the buy side about what you're going to do with the business, because then a lifestyle business or a business that may not be attractive an owner operator, because they want to run it as a profit making business, maybe sort of the perfect fit for somebody who's part of a roll up situation, because then they can be an absentee owner. They can just sell the business and get a smaller piece of a larger pie. So and that focuses on like really like the importance of communication. And oftentimes we see this break down because everyone's trying to hold their card so close to the vest, that if they haven't asked about it in due diligence, then they're like, okay, well, they don't care. If they didn't ask me about it in due diligence, um, then it's set, then it's fine. I don't need to disclose it. And that's just not the
This
case.
is not the case. Yeah, yeah. And that's really interesting. I think you answered a couple questions I had in my head there. But even from the buyer's perspective, when looking at a company, because this is also important for the seller, right? They want to know what's in the buyer's head so they can prepare, right? What are the kind of things that the buyer is looking at maybe on initial glance, like, and is there anything that they maybe frown upon, from the seller's perspective?
Yeah, what they can frown upon, what they frown upon is sort of excess compensation, right? So there can be, oftentimes in these smaller businesses, one salesperson can be responsible for 75% of the sales, and that's fine, right? That's just a risk, that the buyer is going to take on. And what happens if she leaves, right? If she's responsible for 75% of the sales, well, she's a critical key man risk is what we call it in the United States. I'm not sure what we call it overseas, but key man risk. Okay, whether it's the CFO or the CSO, so that's something that the buyer is concerned with. Revenue concentration, right? So if one customer is north of, let's call it 35 to 40%, oftentimes the buyers will discount the revenue that comes from that client. And so if you have a business that's $1 million in EBITDA, and you have to discount some of that revenue, then the seller is going to not get the multiple that they think they're going to get in the sale. um, Financials are obviously a key if they're not really managing their costs. Like we had a situation where a manufacturer, their cost of goods sold was really high related to their revenue. And it was one of those things. It was a structural problem because they didn't adequately build up their supply chain. So they were sourcing things from only one or two or three vendors. So and then obviously the profit margin, right? The where their operational costs sit. What are they doing for advertising, right? Are they altering their financials, or have they altered their financials in the last year to make themselves look better? And we see this a lot in that people think that it's like when you're buying a house and you have to get a down payment, all of a sudden $50,000 shows up in your account. Well, the bank's going to find that out. If all of a sudden your advertising expenses are, 9% of revenue, as an example, in 2023 and 2024, all of a sudden in 2025, they go to 2. Well, that's going to have an impact on sales, and it's not really a true picture of the business as it exists, because you're juicing the numbers and making it look like it's a better company than it is, or you're giving tons of discounts. So I guess it was a more than one, but those are the things that we look at, and when we see those things, it's like, all right, those are sort of red flags that the buyer is going to point out, and we counsel our clients to actively mention, like, hey, we do have this client that's 35%, or we did cut down our advertising, and this is the reason why. And as long as there's an explanation and you're upfront, most buyers are understanding, and they sort of take that into account with their offer.